I'm Cost Out Program Director or Head of Enterprise Programs for a major Australian utility. I'm here this morning to speak to you about the Cost Out program that I led in the organisation and the mechanics of how we actually went around doing that. The work we had in front of us was to actually reduce significantly our operating cost base. So through the regulator of Australian utilities, there's a significant drive across all utilities to reduce their operating cost base. We had a target in front of us of thereabouts a 30% reduction. So the task that we had at hand was to identify the initiatives that would make up being able to get a reduction of 30%, and then after identifying them, then being able to execute them to actually deliver that bottom line result. Obviously, we had significant timeframes we had to work within, and certainly most of the things we had an extremely broad organisational / enterprise perspective. So you add that together and it makes it a very complex multi-year program that we had in front of us. We had a significant amount of challenges as we're going through the program, none the least being that there was a very, very small program team, because the heavy lifting of delivering initiatives was done through people that were still maintaining business as usual, or BAU as we call it. So that was the first significant challenge, how you would actually coordinate and manage a very diverse group of people from right across the organisation to deliver to a time frame that was very quarantined, because we had regulatory requirements around that. In the early days, we used a tool to actually, I suppose, canvas and be able to map what the initiatives were, but that tool did not allow us to do the very close management and project management of those initiatives, both in their own right, but also in a conglomerate sense where they all have to come together. A, because you need to manage resourcing, and B, you have to understand what the overall program is looking like and the impact or risk profile that's imposed on your organisation. So to that end, we commenced in the early days when we were setting the program up with a tool that was good for us to actually get an understanding of what I'll call it the canvas looks like. What it didn't allow to us was to actually do a very strong project management approach. So we had to look around to find how we could actually start to manage the in excess of around 300 individual initiatives at the peak of our time. We came across the tool called Focus HQ. We subsequently did our analysis of that tool, and we found that it fitted very seamlessly into the very niched area that we were looking at as to how to manage a very broad range and suite of cost out initiatives that we need to deliver by particular times. I guess we then faced the challenge of implementing that tool, because again, our main game is to get rid of the actual cost or get the cost base reduced. It wasn't necessarily going through a separate exercise of implementing the tool. In saying that, it was critically important that we spend the time in a parallel sense to put a tool in that firstly was robust, and second, it could be relied upon when we were reporting up to higher levels, up to and including the board and to the external market. The outcomes that we had to achieve and what was required from us as a central program in the business looked to us to really coordinate efforts, both from a resourcing perspective and also from understanding the profile of the risk of the organisation. So my responsibility was to review and report and understand the conglomerate position. What I needed from the business was to move swiftly and deliver the initiatives according to predefined milestones. And we went through a standard approach that's used for cost reduction, where you go through various gates to get to a point where you can execute and then bank savings. So what I needed from the business was to move swiftly through the different gates to deliver what they had committed to do. I needed the business to commit to those dates, and I needed that commitment to go right through up into the executive level. And in turn, the executive would look at me and say, well, I'm happy to do that, but I really need to understand my efforts as opposed to where we are across in an organisational sense. Are we on track? Are we diverting from what we should be doing? is business as usual coming and impacting, which it does in many understandable instances, against the efforts that we're doing? Are we on track? Will we hit it? So there's all these questions that come out when you do a broad-ranging enterprise-wide program, that unless there's a collective view, all that's around is just a suite of bespoke initiatives. That may get you to the end objective of a certain cost-based reduction, or it may not. And we were not going to take the risk of actually having it in a bespoke manner, so we did it in a coordinated manner. So I guess my role was to make sure that the moving parts of the organisation were coordinated, and again, that's where I needed to rely on the tool Focus HQ to do that, because if not, I didn't have eyes and ears that were in the business. What the business needed from me was some time, some love and attention, and some other times was some more robust approaches to make sure that projects and initiatives that were to be delivered by certain times were done so, and done so with quality, and also with the outcome of achieving timeframes that we committed to both board and external parties as to where we would be in our journey. To ensure we were able to achieve a successful outcome, we knew very early in the piece that we could not achieve implementing a new robust tool to allow us to enterprise-wide project manage our initiatives and do it ourselves. We have to understand that the program is already in flight. We've been running for quite a few months until we actually made the decision to stand up the tool within the program. And looking to do this work of migration does two things. One is that it needed to happen, however, it's not my key requirement, because my main focus is to drive the organisation to get to the cost base. As critical and as important as what it was nearly something that had to happen, not necessarily in the sidelines, because that would be somewhat disrespectful, but it certainly needed to happen in a background sense to the foreground of really driving hard for progress. So to that, we formed a view very early that we could try and do it ourselves, and we would not have the expertise, and secondly, we would not have the focus, and thirdly, it would be distracting people away from what we consider to be the main game. So we relied on the vendors of Focus HQ to actually provide that support. It made imminent sense that if you've got an expert group of people that have actually developed the tool, understand how the tool works, and can provide advice on how best to implement it. There's an element where I can keep a very close eye on that, as I did, as well as our head of EPMO did as well. It was critical that the tool set, when it came in, it actually sat as part of our very robust suite of applications we've used. But I was able to put less reliance on myself personally for going in, because I had a fair degree of confidence that the right people on point, the tool would get implemented, which allowed me to continue to focus very strongly on delivering targets to certain timeframes. It's pleasing to sit here and say to you that we were successful in what we set out to achieve. Our journey started way back in January 2017 with setting our targets. Those targets were to reduce our sustainable cost base by around 30%. And again, it's very reassuring that an organisation the size of us has been able to deliver that at the same time as maintaining a utility electricity distribution network that is extremely difficult to maintain, especially in peak seasons, as in high bushfire type seasons. So to achieve what we set out to achieve within the deadline we had, to be able to take out thereabouts at 30% of the cost base, but also to do it without any interruption to our BAU is a commendable effort on behalf of our organisation. It's one that the organisation is suitably proud of. It's one that we're justifiably proud that our partners have helped us get to that point, and it's one that we are really wanting to explain to other people how you can go about these things, because it is a difficult and complex equation to do your BAU at the same as driving a program, but with the right mix, with the right way that you are able to project manage items, initiatives and projects, and with that overarching view about enterprise-wide programs, it is extremely achievable, albeit it's a challenge. It's one that you need to have the absolute buy-in from the board down, But if you have that, it's a natural flow. It was in our organisation that we're able to successfully achieve what we set out to achieve. There's many lessons that we've learned, which you would expect after going through a program such as this, multi-year, enterprise-wide, complex initiatives. And I guess a lot of it does come down to being able to realise, bank and report benefits as early as what you possibly can. The reason that we commenced this journey was to reduce our sustainable cost base, as I've spoken about. To do that and only do it at the end of the 2 or 3 year period, stakeholders need to understand where progress is much more before that. So what you're left with is an exercise of prioritisation. It is critical both from a complexity level, a resourcing level, to make sure that you're doing the right things first. So for instance, it's difficult to go and do any type of major outsourcing work if you haven't gone back and put some foundations in place around, say, your enterprise procurement work or your enterprise process and data activities. So there's an exercise there where you do some foundation work first, because it will be called on later in the program. However, you cannot afford to continue to only do foundation work in the early days without being able to show that you're making noticeable movement in terms of being able to harvest benefits. That is a really key lesson. So there's that probably is as much art as science in that, and it's people who understand the wiring of an organisation which will be critical in terms of how you can actually deliver that. I suppose another exercise is, or another lesson, is that if you're faced with the same scenario as what we were, where you needed to implement a very robust tool, which is what we did with Focus HQ, you have to be careful not to get distracted from that and have that come in virtually the main game, and you take the eye off the ball of actually continuing to drive progress to benefits. It's critical the tool goes in, but there is, again, the main game is to continue to drive progress. In a lot of instances, what the organisation is looking for is for the head of the program to be continually cajoling, pushing, driving, whatever you want to call it, to actually maintain that progress. So distraction can be really an activity that is something that has to be closely managed. You'll also find in a lot of instances, as we did, that things don't go according to plan. That's the same with any program. So you need to be in a position where there is other possibles and probables that can come into play relatively quickly when you can actually need to actually put them into the pipeline. So you'll have a pipeline of initiatives to get to your end goal, and it's important that you know exactly what that pipeline looks like, and you're in a position where you can apply substitution if you need to. I guess another example or another lesson that came through from us is, again, this will be around implementing new ways of working. So we talk agile, we talk adaptive, we talk digital. Now, a lot of people will talk about those in the frame of they're just technology concepts. They are not technology concepts. They may be used in technology, but they're ways of working within the business. And an adoption of those principles, again, means the ability to harvest benefits early, get work done early. If it's not quite right, you can cycle back, you can check, you can revalidate, you can keep going. It creates a momentum in its own right. So I guess another lesson we learned is that you need those new ways of working in the current era we are now, because waiting for a more traditional waterfall, if I can call it that, waterfall approach, will make it extremely difficult for you to be able to bank benefits early. I suppose the last thing I'd like to reflect on, and it was a good question that was asked of me, is that the wiring between the board to your executive and then down to the actual initiative owners, that will be difficult to firstly establish, and it may be difficult to maintain. But unless you maintain that very strong nexus between those three initiatives and the initiatives themselves, you'll find that despite good attempts and despite a whole stack of other distractions or issues that come to hand, will get unpicked and get unwired. And therefore, if it's not, or if you're in a position where those things do become unpicked, unfortunately, you're left to actually try and make a progress. So when it does happen, and you have to prepare, in some instances it will, that's why it's really important that the pipeline of initiatives that are there are ready to to be moved on if there needs to be a substitution effect. It's also, I suppose, the last thing is that despite all good attempts, when you set out on the journey of estimating what an initiative or a program will actually save you, invariably it doesn't quite come in at that number. So another key learning was be prepared to see erosion, a term that's used in these programs, that when you're expecting to bank a certain number, by the time you've finished executing, you find it's a number that's significantly less in a lot of instances. And what that is, again, lesson being is that the pipeline initiatives has to have a buffer of significantly more than what is being executed at the time, because there will be the need to top up things that are currently in execution for you to get to the end game. I guess when I reflect on the time over the last couple of years when we've been running the program, there is some key, I suppose, reflections that I come back to, which I've written some down here, which I would like to just speak to quickly. Firstly, the importance of the very robust tool that underpins what we do, both from a project management perspective, but also from the risk and governance perspective. Any program of the nature that we've been through does potentially put the organisation in a significant risk, and therefore, quite rightly, there's many eyes from a governance perspective that look over what you're doing, and that should be the case. So unless you're in a position where you have absolute truth in the data that's coming through, then you'll forever be in a position of firstly, are we moving the organisation to a point where the conglomerate risk that I spoke about earlier is too much to bear for the organisation. I guess another one, which is a standard project management approach, it's all about time, cost, and scope. To that end, if you're in a position where you're doing a program such as this, there's many different ways that it can be delivered. My strong belief is it has to be led internally. There has to be a very senior person or persons that are actually leading the charge of doing the work of taking the cost base out. However, you have to be really, really smart to get the right partners from an external perspective to help you. Again, the reason that we use Focus HQ is the past record that we've used them in other assignments, the strength and the robustness of the tool when we actually did quite a detailed assessment of what other tools were out there that we could use. It gave us confidence that as we were going forward, we weren't putting the organisation at a significant risk that wasn't within the way that we operate of tolerances within the organisation. I think I reflect back as well that there's a program of any program sort has a real conglomerate of systems. Invariably there's a collaboration tool like a SharePoint, for instance. There may be a project management tool like this project. You probably use PowerPoint to do executive reports. It's quite complex in its own right to actually put that suite of systems, and that really, as I've mentioned earlier, is not the main game. So as quick as what you can get that suite of tools working seamlessly and in harmony with each other means the quicker you can get on to actually doing the direct work of actually reducing the cost of the business, and at the same time being understanding, quite rightly, that there's a lot of eyes that are watching what you're doing, and in understanding are you putting the organisation at a risk that is not acceptable. I thought that was quite a strong learning from what we went through, and it's something that I would really counsel any program director who is about to go through this to be very clear on how that hangs together quite early. The last thing I think I would say is that, again, there is no one size fits all. There will be an awful lot of views, an awful lot of thoughts as to how it could work. You really need to get a partner, if it's a partner of putting the tool in, if it's to help you on the journey, that can get in, can quickly gain your trust, can demonstrate a very clear understanding of how your business works, be in a position where they're flexible in terms of how you would engage, and be in a position where very early in the piece you feel that external party is right in your inner sanctum, is right in your tent, helping you go forward. Because you'll find in a journey like this, it's hard, You will not have a lot of friends as you go through it. I mean, probably the only two friends you'll have at the end of the day will be your board, your MD and your CFO. They will love you, but most other people in the organisation at some point of the journey won't. So it's a little bit of a thankless exercise, albeit all organisations are going through what we've gone through. It's something which is a new way of working now. So anyone who thinks that we can just do a program of cost out and then that's it, finished. No board will allow you to do that. After you have gone through the heartache of actually reducing your cost base, then board and executive committees are very clear in their expectation that it's a way of working. You will have inculcated a new way of working. People that have been involved in the program across the business think, I now have to understand the cost is as critical to my work as what maintaining my BAU was in earlier times. So look, they I think might be closing reflections after a number of years of doing this. I do wish you well in your journey. I hope you will be successful as what we have been, and I'll look forward to hearing some of the other stories of after the programs have been concluded.